yay, man. All out of options, nothing to choose. I pissed out on Netflix, I'm sick of the news. I'd sign up to Sky, but I don't wanna pay. I've been on furlough since May. Never go and listen to a Cockney attitude. Ooh, breaking away. Got to find a better way. I'd rather watch Auf Wiedersehen again and listen to what these old men have to say.
Hello, and welcome back to Auf Wiedersehen Again Podcast, and this is episode number 13. And it's me, your genial host, Mr. Andy Sledge, with my partner in crime and co-host and wearer of a fantastic new jacket, Mr. Young George Bradley. George,
hello.
How on earth are you on this fine and wonderful day?
Yeah, pretty good. Any opportunity to sport a new top, I'm there.
I did ask when I saw. You told me about it, and then you posted. It's actually that. I was looking at that myself. It's the old feeler, isn't it?
Yeah.
I was looking at maybe making a purchase of that one myself. So,
I had two people come up to me in the pub yesterday, asked me where I got it from. Because
Yeah.
they wanted to buy. One guy went off and was buying it on his phone. As soon as I told him, yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, there were. If you actually watch the documentary Casuals, they feature that jacket on the documentary Casuals when they're talking about the guy from 80s Casual Classics tells you all about it and stuff like that.
Because they've got shops, haven't they, up north?
Nottingham or something like that. I don't know. It's not north, but it's north compared to you. South compared to where I'm from. But yeah, very nice jacket. I was definitely thinking about buying one myself. So apart from purchasing jackets and getting compliments in pubs, George, what have you been up to?
Just been out and about. I was at the hospital yesterday getting a heart scan, my 6-monthly checkup. So I think that went all right. They don't tell me for a little while yet, so waiting to hear about that. But yeah,
well, don't die yet.
No, I feel all right.
We've got about another 27 episodes to go before you can die.
Yeah, I know the symptoms if something's wrong. I know them well, so I'm feeling all right. So
the symptoms of something wrong, collapsing and shooting pains down your left arm and fucking
throwing up and not eating and all sorts of horrible things. Yeah.
Anyway, I myself. Oh, you've frozen. But anyway, I myself had my first vaccination yesterday.
Oh, right, yeah.
So, I mean, to be honest, I was thinking about just not.
You feel all right today?
Yeah, I feel fine.
You feel all right?
Bit of a sore arm.
Oh.
Feel like I've been punched in the arm. But apart from that,
yeah. I was wiped out the next day. I just spent day in bed,
Felt like I didn't.
The second one I was fine.
I was supposed to go training last night, and then I got home after the. So I had my jab about 4.
Yeah.
I was supposed to go training at 7. Yeah, I didn't make that. So I was like, I felt a bit rough, and I just texted my mate. I'm not going. And I went out and got some chips from the chip shop, and I had sausage and chips and some caramel biscuits, and drank a few pints of squash. They said take lots of fluids on board, and then I went to bed. Woke up this morning, felt fine. You've frozen again, young George.
Oh, it's
anyway,
good. Yeah.
Anyway. So
yeah, you had as well. You're back to normal now. Yeah.
Right. Well, let's hope anyway. Let's just hope we don't have any further internet issues during the episode. So, not only that, as we all know from my social medias, if you're following, I have had some issues with bus lane cameras, motherfuckers. So I got pinged twice in a bus lane camera last year. Now, I was in the bus lane. However, it was a couple of days after the geezer stabbed all them people in Forbury Gardens in Reading, and they closed all the roads. So the only possible access was in the bus lane. So, apologies for avoiding the scene of mass murder and terrorism by going in your bus lane, Reading Borough Council, you fucking pricks. So yes, I'm in the process of arguing that very, very much so. So, like I said, this is episode 13. And if this is the last episode of series 1, the finale of series 1, we've made it to the end of series 1, George. Nobody ever thought we would do it. Nobody ever thought we would do it. We've been regular as clockwork.
And it definitely ends in a bang. Definitely ends in a bang.
It does. So we've got a couple of extra things to talk about here. So if you would like to contact the podcast in any way or for any reason, remember you can email us, and we welcome all forms of feedback, compliments, constructive criticism and or abuse on Auf Wiedersehen Again at gmail.com. That's Auf Wiedersehen Again at gmail.com. We have social medias. Please do follow us on social media. Instagram at Auf Wiedersehen Again Podcast. That's Instagram at Auf Wiedersehen Again Podcast. Twitter at Auf Again. That's Twitter at Auf Again. We have a Facebook page. So I would like you, please encourage you to like and share the Facebook page, which is Auf Wiedersehen Again Podcast. And if you are watching on YouTube, please do subscribe to the YouTube channel and click the bell, which will alert you to any new episodes. If you're not on YouTube right now and you are on audio, please at some point do go to the YouTube channel, which is Auf Wiedersehen Again Podcast. And like I say, click subscribe and click the bell. And if you are on YouTube and you find yourself on a long car journey at some point in the future and would like to listen to mine and George's dulcet tones, we are available on all good podcast platforms: Spotify, iTunes, Anchor, Google Podcast, Breaker, and many, many more. And our new episodes are released every Friday at 10 a.m. And our theme music, as always, is composed and performed by the guitar man, Mr. Lee Dusky. So we urge you to please do like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And please do spread the word and tell all of your friends. And we are sponsored by Top Gun Tattooing of number 12, the Harris Arcade in Reading. Their website is topguntattoo.co.uk and their phone number is audible 189-968-667. And remember, we have two fantastic offers for the listeners of our podcast. Number one is you are entitled to a 20% discount off any tattoo with Zach from Top Gun Tattooing. I was actually in Top Gun Tattooing yesterday, and the other day, but not yesterday, yesterday, and I spoke to Zach, and Zach is sitting by the phone, desperately waiting for someone to call him up and say, Zach, Hadaway and Shite Man. And if you say Zach, Hadaway and Shite Man, you will get 20% off your tattoo. Award-winning tattoo parlor studio in Reading. But not only that, remember, George, we are the only podcast in the world which will give away free tattoos to every single listener. And we have been given a request by one of our listeners. So we're going to give a big shout out right now to Rob Taylor. Rob Taylor is one of our loyal listeners and interacts with us quite regularly on the Facebook page. So big up, Rob. We appreciate the support. You are an absolute legend. And Rob Taylor is encouraging George to get his Neville and Lottie tattoo. He says, hurry up, George, get your Neville and Lottie tattoo. So we all want to know when it's going to happen. Yeah. We need to see that now you've got the jacket, George, you can cover it up whenever you want. Yeah. Neville and Lottie tattoo. The tattoo parlor's reopened. The world is reopening. The pubs are reopening. We're gonna get you up here and we're gonna get you pissed off. Yeah. We're gonna get you a Neville and Lottie tattoo. But any of our other readers, probably quite free tattoo, free Neville and Lottie tattoo. So if you want a free tattoo, terms and conditions apply. It is the Neville and Lottie design, and it does feature very heavily in this episode. So if you want a free Neville and Lottie tattoo, like I say, email us in Auf Wiedersehen Again at gmail.com, and we will pay for your tattoo, film it, etc., etc. And like I say, big up to Rob Taylor for the suggestion and encouragement for George to fulfill his Neville and Lottie tattoo dreams. Now, second thing. Remember, we've been doing our giveaway competition, giveaway of the Jimmy Neal autobiography in Northern Soul. And we have a winner, chicken dinner.
Hey.
So the winner of the Jimmy Neal autobiography was one of our loyal listeners who is also an avid communicator via email with the podcast. And he was a guy who liked, shared, and tagged 3 of his friends on the Twitter post, and it was Mr. Stuart Burgess. So congratulations, Stuart Burgess. You are the winner of the Jimmy Neal book. So if you could send us an email with your full postal address on, and that book will be in the post to you at some point in the very near future. So those are the 2 star listeners and star fans of the week. But also just special mention, we had throughout the first series, we had a couple of other star listeners. So big shout out to 2 other people who have been in regular communication with the podcast, which was Scott Stevenson and Dougie Brown, who we've already mentioned on the podcast. I think it was Scott was the guy who had the problem with the audio only going in one ear. So I think by the sounds of it, we sorted all that out. So yes, big shout out, like I say, Stuart Burgess, the winner of the book, Rob Taylor, who is the supporter of George's Neville and Lottie tattoo, Scott Stevenson and Dougie Brown. So if you would like a shout out on the podcast, all you have to do is be a regular listener to the podcast and interact with us on one of the various social media channels, and we will support you if you support us. So it's all the boring stuff out of the way. Well, not boring stuff. It was quite nice to talk about for some of our listeners. But so this is,
it's someone's birthday today. One of the cast.
George, I did not know. Enlighten me, George. Enlighten me.
He's gone now, but he would have been 84.
What? Oh, Pat Roach.
Yeah. Francis Roach.
Francis Patrick Roach.
Pat Roach, yeah.
Well, I'm glad you're here, George. I did not know that. No. I think I did see a picture up somewhere earlier on today.
Yeah, 1937 he was born.
Well, there you go. Look, I think that's...
Yeah, it was on the Auf Wiedersehen, one of the other... Yeah.
Yeah. Well, by the way, if there is anybody listening who is part of the admin team of the official Auf Wiedersehen Pet Facebook page, pull your finger out and approve our post. Basically, I think we're being blackballed by the official Auf Wiedersehen Pet page, because I try and post every week when I pimp out the new episode, right? Obviously, there's several Auf Wiedersehen Pet pages, and some of them you need admin approval to post, and some of them you don't. So obviously, the main Auf Wiedersehen Pet page, you need admin approval to post your stuff up. And they have never approved one of my posts about the podcast. So, admin of the official Auf Wiedersehen Pet page, what's your fucking problem? Yeah? Sort it out. I've sent you very polite messages, and you've refused to respond to the messages. You've refused to approve any of my posts. And it's got to the stage now where at the end of series 1, so fuck you, yeah? So if you don't like it, contact me and we'll have a row. But yes, so the official Auf Wiedersehen Pet Facebook page, they're dead to me. Absolutely dead to me, they are. But there are several others. Like, so there's a guy called Graham Teasdale. Big shout out to Graham. Communication with him. And Daniel Lancaster. He is also the guy. He's the guy that's done the videos for all of the locations and he's been around all the locations and stuff like that. So yeah, they're So Graham Teasdale in particular, he runs a couple of the different pages on Facebook, the Jimmy Neal Appreciation Society and the unofficial Auf Wiedersehen Pet page. And Graham approves all of our posts. So Graham is definitely on our Christmas card lists, whereas the admin of the official page are not. So anyway, so series 1, episode 13, the series finale, When the Boat Goes Out. So this episode was first broadcast on the 10th of February, 1984. And it was written by Stan Hay. It was not written by Ian Lafreniere or why have I just gone blank? Dick Clement and Ian Lafreniere. So there were a couple of there was a couple of locations around Dusseldorf that we'll talk about, and a couple of little facts and potential goofs when we will talk about the episode. So obviously episode 13 picks up basically straight away chronologically from episode 12. So obviously by the way, I got a telling off by me mother, right? Again, big shout out to me mother. Talk about a loyal listener. Me mother and me father, they, me stepdad, my mother and my stepdad, Alistair, they are avid listeners to the podcast. I'm talking 10 a.m. every Friday morning. That's where they are, in the living room listening. So big love to me mother and Alistair. And my mother wanted me to point out that the actress who plays the part of Vera is that good of an actress that she makes me hate the character of Vera. Yeah, my mother was most disturbed the fact that I was a bit derogatory towards Vera in the last episode, and I stand by what I said. Vera's a twat, and I don't like her. She's a fucking bitch. But the actress, who unfortunately died very, very young, I believe, she's a fantastic Geordie actress. So, Caroline, I think she was called, something like that. Caroline Hutchinson or something like that. Anyway, so yes, I got a bit of a telling off from my mother for basically, slagging off Vera to the nth degree. But Vera deserved it. The actress that played Vera did not. Sorry, mother. Right. So, so like I said, the episode picks up directly chronologically. So it's obviously, it's a Monday morning or Tuesday morning, whatever. Vera was there at the weekend. Vera's dropped the bomb in the last episode that she doesn't want a divorce. So they're on the site and they are laying bricks, and they're laying. You can see the bricks that they're laying are like the roof bricks. They're laying the bricks that are going in the diagonal, the angle up to put the roof on top of the building. So it's very very realistic, the point of the building that they're doing. And Dennis is laying bricks and he's doing the old "she loves me not." With every brick that he lays, she loves me not.
I think he's still pissed. He sounds a bit pissed.
Well, funny enough you say that, George. I was actually going to say the same thing myself. Do you think he is a little bit steamboats there? Or do you think he's just a bit mental? I don't know. And then he goes,
I think so, yeah.
And now she loves me again, like that. And Oz, in his usual tactless manner, pipes up, "Are you all right, Dennis?" And he's like, "I'm wonderful." And Oz, Detective Oz there, he's like, "Well, you seem a little bit down in the dumps." He goes, "Whoa, I'm full of the joys of spring, I am, Oz." And he's like, No, that's, that's what you say. But I can see different, mate. I can tell by the way you're laying them bricks. I mean, you're not a happy man, Dennis, man. You're listless.
Listless, yeah.
No, that's a bit of a long word for us. And it's the same with me budgie back home, Tommy. Now, incidentally, something that the winner of our Jimmy Neal book, Stuart Burgess, will find out. Jimmy Neal's best friend was called Tommy.
Yeah.
And not only that, not only that, he was my friend's uncle.
Oh.
So a friend of mine called Lee, my friend of mine called Lee, his mother is called Lynn, and her brother was called Tommy. And Tommy was in a band. We used to play in the bands with Jimmy Neal. We used to went to school with Jimmy Neal. And then one day, Tommy. Then one day, Tommy just vanished. And he says in the book, I think he paid for a lot of private detectives and all that to try and find out what happened to him. And basically, he's come to the assumption that he was murdered. My mate said that apparently it was. I thought it sounded like a suicide because he left his jewelry on the side and went out somewhere, and that's normally something somebody does before they kill themselves. Yeah. But anyway, so he calls Jimmy. So Oz says that his budgie is called Tommy. Now, this may just be a coincidence. I don't know, or it might just be something. But he says, Oz is talking about something from back home, and he says, obviously something that he cares about, and he says it's his budgie called Tommy. And he says, if he's not knocking 7 colours out of that bell, well, now there's something wrong. And he says, aye, ye nah, Den. He says, you can learn a lot about human nature by studying budgies. And Den says, really? He says, aye. And Den says, right. He says, I suppose I was feeling a bit down in the beak. What would you do for a budgie that you can do for me?
In the beak, yeah.
He says, well, it varies, doesn't it? He says, sometimes we'll give him a nice bit of cuttlefish to peck at, or shift his mirror around the cage and give him a bit of a change of scenery. That usually does the trick. And Dennis has obviously been very facetious, and he says, that's not going to work for me, is it? And Oz says, no, I don't suppose so. Anyway, Nev tries to lighten the mood a little bit, and he says, oh, is this an official strike or what? And then Oz says, I'm just trying to cheer Den up, man. And Dennis is, quite adamant. He says, I don't need cheering up. Thank you very much, Oz. And as for you and your budgie, the only thing we've got in common is that we're both sick of seeing your face through the bars of our cage. And as usual, Oz just doesn't know when to let up. He goes, now, if that's not a depressed punter, and he's about to say something, and Neville grabs him and pushes him away. And Oz is like, what are you doing, man? And Neville's trying to be tactful, and he says, it's Vera, man. And he goes, I know it's Vera, man. I was just trying to find out what's going on. And Dennis is, inquiring now what's going on. He says, what's the matter with you two? And Neville says, just Oz, man. Dennis, he's just a bit concerned about you, that's all. And Oz, straight to the point, tactful as ever. Look, are you going back to England or not? That's all. And Dennis is, straight away, he says, what's that got to do with you? And he says, well, you're my mate, aren't you? And I just wanted to know what you were going to do if before I decide what I'm going to do. I don't want to be stuck here on me jack in Germany when all of my mates have gone home. And Dennis quite rightly says, so you're really concerned about you. You're not concerned about me at all. He says, look, I'll tell you what I told Vera. He says, I'll make my mind up at the end of the week. And when I do, it's what's best for me that matters. Not for Vera, not for Dagmar, and not for you, or for your flipping budgie. For once in my life, I'm putting my interests first, okay? Which, is fair enough. And then, there's a bit of a pause. And what does he do?
Oz hasn't finished.
He says, well, could you let me know by Thursday? And Dennis throws a load of cement, and Oz moves out the way. And what happens? Neville gets the cement straight in the kisser. So they cut to inside, still on the building site, but this is the inside workers. So it's Barry, Moxie, and Wayne. And Wayne is carving on a bit of skirting board. So as you can see, he's making a love boat. And Barry's like, are you all right? And he says, I'm terrific. He says,
looks pretty rubbish, actually.
Yeah, it doesn't look that good, does it? He says, no reason. He says, I'm just intrigued to know why one of these flats will end up with an inscribed skirting board. And he says, it's not for here, Barry, it's for Krista. And then Moxie and Barry take the piss there. Ooh, Krista. And Barry says, so it's true then. Obviously, the idea of Wayne, falling in love is so alien to them. And Wayne says, yeah, it's true. He says, you know, there's no need to sound so triumphant about it. I'm not going to hide anything, least of all a 6-foot piece of timber, Barry says. May I say, Wayne, that it is a highly original love token, that is. A plank, Moxie? No heart-shaped tokens for Wayne's girl. Only the finest bit of skirting board will suffice. And Moxie makes a joke. He says, I suppose it's a way of starting a home together. Anyway, Wayne's obviously realizes. He says, are you taking the urine, son? He says, oh, hey. You've got to admit, mate, he says that it does seem a bit strange coming from you, like, I thought you were the love 'em and leave 'em type. And Wayne says, jump 'em and leave 'em. Now that's the difference. See, instead of carving notches, I'm now carving names. Oh, he's been all romantic. And Herr Grunwald approaches and Moxie warns them, hey, Herr Grunwald. So Herr Grunwald turns up, hello. And Wayne, being a bit of a piss take, he says, hello, Herr Grunwald. We were so busy there, we didn't see you coming for a minute. So Herr Grunwald says, could you stop working for a moment, please? And Barry says, well, if you say so, Herr Grunwald, yes. He says, now I have to talk to all the British workers about the new labour regulations. Could you and your colleagues come to my office at 1/4 of an hour before the lunch break? So they go to the admin hut, and Wayne is very much all doy-eyed towards the beautiful Krista. So,
oh yeah.
Yeah, oh, I mean...
He's getting a nice smile as well.
And rightly so, a very beautiful young lady she is. That still didn't reply to my 2 messages on Instagram. But not that I'm bitter about that, George. Anyway, so Herr Grunwald's got them all.
Yeah, I sent her one as well, actually.
Oh, did you? How dare... So she's ignored both of us. How dare she, George?
Yeah,
anyway,
yeah.
So... So Herr Grunwald's got all the Brits in the office, and he's obviously explaining. He says, well, gentlemen, as you probably know, there have been 1 or 2 changes in the federal government's attitude to Gastarbeiter, which is visiting workers. This is because of increasing unemployment here in West Germany. Oh, yes, we have it too. And Bomber tries to make a joke that, yes, but ours is bigger than yours. So Herr Grunwald says, so we have to look at ways of keeping more jobs for our own people. Until now, you guys have worked here without paying tax or insurance. And that has been very convenient for us, for all of us, yeah. So obviously it's easier for the company to pay pay without having to, pay the tax and national insurance. So it, like I say, they've both enjoyed this loophole. It says, but from next Monday, if you wish to stay and work here in Germany, you will have to apply for official registration and be issued with a license. Now, Oz is come full circle now, and Oz is, very much gone from being in love with a German woman to now being back to his usual xenophobic, retarded self, to all things German. And he says, yeah, does that mean we've got to give up our British nationality? Because I'm bugging if I'm becoming a German. And Herr Grunwald's like, oh, he's like, no, you do not understand. As members of the EEC, you have the right to work here. But from now, you must accept your financial obligations to the German state. And then a ridiculous question. Oz says, well, can we not just graft here and then send war tax home? And obviously quite rightly, Neville's like, don't be ridiculous, Oz. And he goes, I'm not being ridiculous. I just think it's a bit strong that we give Germany all of our skill and labour, and now it's trying to issue us with dog licenses and take what little pittance of money we earn off war skill. Anyway, I mean, just again, the logic that he employs is just, ridiculous. It's absolutely mental. Neville says, just ignore him, Herr Grunwald. So Herr Grunwald says, if you could let me know as soon as possible if you wish to stay or not, we can get on with the paperwork. And Neville straight away says, I can let you know, Herr Grunwald, I'm going back to England. Bomber says, me too, Herr Grunwald, family calls. And Grunwald says, I'll be sorry to see you both go. And they're obviously very well-respected workers. Barry says, I'm not quite sure. Moxie neither. And then Grunwald turns to Wayne and Dennis. Now, obviously, this is, it's potentially awkward, very, very awkward.
Mr. Patterson.
Because Dagmar is watching, And Grunwald says, what about you, Mr. Patterson? And Dagmar has a good look through, and he says, I haven't decided yet either. And he's quite sheepish about it. Obviously, he doesn't want to, upset Dagmar. So Grunwald says, well, it looks like no one will be staying, yeah? And then Dennis basically drops Wayne in. He said, I wouldn't be too sure about that, Herr Grunwald. And obviously, Wayne is still casting the loving looks across the hut to young Krista. So, they go, obviously they cut from the admin hut, they cut to the pub, and they are obviously discussing, what's been going on in Oz is, this is a right puzzler, this one. I don't want to go back home, but I don't really want to stop here working in Germany, especially if I'm just going to be working with Germans. And Moxie says, I thought you had a wife and kid there was. And Bomber straight away goes, that's why he doesn't want to go back. And Oz, not actually realizing he's making himself look great. He says, true. What about you, Moxie? You'll stop here with us, won't you? Moxie says, as much as I like it, Oz, I can't say I relish the idea of paying tax. When you think about the squalid lifestyle that we lead at the moment, it's going to be even worse with less money. And Bomber says, sounds like another boy Blighty bound. And Moxie says, no way, Bomb. There's even less chance of that happening. And then so Moxie reveals the reason. He says, how's that like? And he says, well, I've got a record. I've been in Nick for 2 years before I come out here. And Oz is like, yeah. And he says, this was supposed to be my fresh start in life. And Oz says, what did you get locked up for? And he says, arson. He reveals it. And Oz is like, arson? He says, yeah, I know. I didn't want to tell you blokes, in case you got worried.
He waited long enough to tell them, didn't he?
Exactly. Well, I'm surprised nobody asked, but did he tell them he'd been in prison? Yeah. I can't remember. But he, they're living in a wooden hut. So, you can imagine that it wouldn't be a subject you'd want to talk about. And like he says, so I didn't want to tell you blokes, in case you're worried, like you and, about being in the same hut as me. Like I said, I guess it doesn't matter now. And Ozzy goes, arson, he goes, and you don't even smoke.
Yeah, it's a good line.
And Bomber says, how'd that come about, Mox? And he says, well, I was working on a building site, back in Liverpool. Bastard site manager had it in for us. Kept docking me wages for no reason. And one day, I just lost my rag. So I set fire to his hut. And Oz was like, what? Was he still in it? And Moxie says, not for long. No. Yeah, so Moxie set fire to a hut with somebody in it. And he says, so there you go, record for arson, Dodge City, address. And Oz says, when? He says, Kirby. Reckon me chances on Merseyside are even worse than Everton's. Oz says, I see what you mean. And he says, well, stop on and Moxie. That's the only thing you can do, really. And Moxie says, yeah, I know, Oz, but, once they get me name down on the forms and the files, it'll only be a matter of time before they find out about me past. So Dennis, at this point, enters the bar and he walks purposefully to the other end of the bar to avoid the conversation. And Oz...
And he's had a couple.
Yeah, well, whether he's drunk or whether he's just got the rage on, you can just see that he's not in the best of fettles, is he? And then straight away, hey, Dennis, you'll never guess what? Moxie's an arsonist. And Dennis just says, schnapps. And he brings the bottle over and he says, leave the bottle. So this is setting the scene. Dennis is already, we've seen him on the top there, with the bricks. She loves me, she loves me. And now he's about to fire into a bottle of schnapps.
Oh yeah.
He's definitely not the happiest of campers. So they cut back to the hut. Anyway, so Neville's sitting with his tattoo out, which is going to look good on your arm, George. And Wayne is copying it down on his bit of skirting board. And Neville says, I'd forgotten all about this till he asked. And Wayne says, well, it's lucky I reminded you, weren't it? Imagine what the scene would be like coming Saturday, you and Brenda locked passionately on the sofa together over a nice cup of cocoa, unable to control your ardor any longer. You slip off your pajama jacket and wallop. Brenda's cries wake up half of bloody Tyneside. You got 5 days to work out the story, ain't you? And he says, well, whatever I tell her, she's not going to believe it though, is she? And he says, have you finished yet? And Wayne's like, yeah, I just wanted to get a rough idea. So it's it's a little bit tactless, isn't it? Can I copy the tattoo that you absolutely despise? But Neville says, what are you making? And he says, sort of a commemorative plaque, I suppose, 2 hearts intertwined forever, Wayne and Krista. And he says, a bit like Marks and Sparks, or a bit like Neville and Lottie. Just to rub it in there that little bit more. And Neville has obviously got home, and he says, instead of making tactless jokes, Wayne, why can't you use your rancid imagination to help me find an explanation for this? And Wayne says, yeah, you're right. He says, let me think. What about if you tell her it was your first night out, you underestimated the strength of the German beer, you got pissed out your brains, and you woke up with that on your arm? And he goes, that's no good. That's the truth. I mean, you couldn't make that up. He goes, that's no good. Truth. Anyway, he goes, thanks a bunch, Wayne. I mean, he's been a bit of a prick there, isn't he? I appreciate he's in a bit of a bind, but Wayne is genuinely trying to help him. And he says, thanks a bunch, Wayne. He was anytime, soldier. So anyway, then Barry enters, and as Nev's leaving, and he says, all right, Nev, and he says, not really, Barry, thank you. And he says, Nev, now you're going home, don't forget about your little TATTO, will you? And Neville's like, Barry, why don't you get STUFFED, will you? Why don't you get stuffed? And it takes Barry, Neville leaves the hut, and Barry stood there for a couple of seconds. There's a bit of a pregnant pause, and Barry works out what he's actually said to him. He realizes he's told him to get stuffed, and he goes, charming. So, Wayne just says, look, don't take offense, Barry. There's a lot of chickens going home to roost this week. Pressure's on, mate. So we've been in our own little private cocoon here for 6 months now. Real life is howling at the door again. Now, we now get a little bit, maybe is soppy the right word? I mean, obviously, the entire premise of the show is, the guys, being the rough and tough guys and joking and whatever. And I think, for the final episode, they've tried to include a little bit of a softer storyline. And anyway, Barry says to Wayne, he says, Wayne, there's a real serenity about you these days. And Wayne says, well, that's the power of love, isn't it, Barry? Was this before Huey Lewis in the news? I think maybe, I don't know. And Barry says, I suppose it is, yeah. He said, and then he says, he looks all forlorn. He goes, what's it feel like? Love. I mean, being in love. I don't really know. I don't really sparkle in that department. See, between you and me, or the adjacent one either, I'm the sort of bloke who looks at a 3-year expiry date on a packet of Johnnies and wonder if he'll ever use them in time. And Wayne says, come on, your time will come, mate, and you'll know when it is. I'm telling you. And Barry says, again, he says, what's it feel like? And Wayne says, what's it feel like? He says, well, love is sitting in a hut on a German building site, carving 2 names into a plank of wood without feeling a prat about it. So that's really the definition of love. And, so Barry just says, look, I know I've been a bit viperish in the past. He says, where you're concerned, Wayne, but that was almost poetry. So they cut to the bar, and Neville is still attempting to ponder some viable excuses for his tattoo.
He's getting worried now. It's getting near home time. Yeah.
It is the countdown clock's ticking, isn't it? So Neville comes up with a ridiculous idea. He says, how about if I contributed to a German heart disease charity fund, and instead of one of them little flags for me lapel, they put this tattoo on my arm. And Mosh says, very ingenious that, and even Bros says, even Brenda would see through that fairy tale, man. And he looks at Dennis, and Dennis is getting tucked right into that schnapps, and he says, I bet Dennis would come up with something, and Dennis is definitely now Stephen. Not a chance. And Moxie says, what's got into him? Bomber says, I don't know. He's certain.
He looks, I don't know, he either is steaming or...
Well, I've heard conflicting stories of the various sort of behind the scenes documentaries and things, but the rumor was that they were, all the beers that they drank on set were real beers. And also,
I read that. Yeah.
If you read in Oz's autobiography, Jimmy Neal's autobiography, which was won by Stuart Burgess again, he talks about how he used to get to the set early in the morning before everybody else, and like the directors and the producers were all sat around the table at 10 a.m. getting tucked into the champagne and that. And so like he used to turn up and go into the office to check on things, because he was, raging alcoholic, you know what I mean? And so it was the early 80s, when drinking in the office, and obviously within the TV industry it was even more prevalent. So yes, that was the thing. So anyway, whether he is really drunk or not, we will never ever know unless Tim Healy ever decides to come on board as a guest on the podcast. So if you do know Tim Healy, feel free to give him a bell. And anyway, so they're at the bar and he's like, I don't know, but he's certainly taking hold. And Oz says, I'll have a word with him. He'll talk to me. And he starts walking towards it. And Dennis just says, stop right where you are, Oz, in a very aggressive tone. And he's got no time for it. And he says, come on. And Bomber says, come on, Den, where are your mates? Whatever it is, you can share it with us. And Dennis, very maudlin about it, he says, a trouble shared is a trouble half. That was one of Vera's favourite sayings, that was. And Neville says, come on, Den, snap out of it, man. And Dennis says, having none of it. He says, snap out of it. Will you listen to this, lad, eh? Have you lot had any idea what it's like being kicked out of a marriage? It's like being asked to take down all those walls that we've been building brick by brick with your bare hands. Imagine what that feels like, eh? Aye? And he says, then imagine what it would be like if they came along and said, right, now put them all back up again. And Bomber, genuinely says, we can help you, Den. And Dennis says, thanks for the offer, Bomber, but you cannot. He goes, I help you with your problems. Doesn't work the other way around. That's how it is. So all of you and he slaps the money on the bar and goes, just do me the only favour that you can, will you? He says, just leave me alone. So we cut back to the site. And so Dagmar and Krista are heading into the admin hut, and they are approached by a couple of the German workers. The German workers realise that both Dagmar and Krista are, in relationships with the English, and they are not happy about it, and they're basically trying to throw us out of the works. And so the German worker, he says, I've even got it all here. He says, Mein Damen, hatten Sie Lust, was zu trinken guten Abend? Ladies, would you like to come out for a drink tonight? And Dagmar says, Nein, wir haben schon was anderes vor. We've already made plans. And the German worker is not happy with this, and he sort of blocks the door. And he says, Aber kommen schon, ich bissen nicht. He says, I don't bite. And Krista says, no, nothing. And then he said, so the German says, he says, I can't even pronounce that. Anyway, he says, yeah, too busy with the bloody English. You can hear him say the word Englander. Yeah. So the German workers are not.
That's the only bit I understood.
Yeah. So don't get me wrong. I've retrieved this information from the internet. This is not my. This is definitely not me knowing anything German. So the German workers are definitely not happy that the English lads have slipped in and taken over the admin hut with regards to the young ladies. So anyway, so Oz is trying to persuade Barry to hang around, and he says, how are you, Barry, man? Stop yelling at me. Just think me and you on the razzle every night in Dusseldorf. It'll be great, man. Now, I mean, obviously, Oz has never really, shown any kind of interest in hanging around with Barry, so it's a bit of a strange one. Anyway, Barry says, he says, look, sorry, Oz. He goes, forsaking carnal gratification, the die is cast and it's Saudi for me. And Oz, tactful as ever, says, Barry, can you not see how desperate I am when I'm asking you, man? Barry says, that's supposed to be flattering.
Yeah.
Supposed to melt my heart, is it? Well, I'm sorry. It's not. And Barry gets quite false. He says, I'm not going to. And Moxie says, hey, Dan. He says, you're wasting your time, you know. You want to get him to change. You won't get him to change his mind. And Oz says, well, what about you, Moxie? Do you not fancy it? Moxie says, I'm sorry, Oz. He says, but I'm going to have to find somewhere that doesn't have an extradition treaty with Britain. It's like, you know, Moxie's going on like he's some kind of internationally wanted criminal. He served his prison sentence and left prison. And, construction. Yeah. Half the people who do construction have probably been in jail, man. You know what I mean? And anyway, Moxie's got it in his head that he's got to find, and Oz says, well, try the Antarctic, why don't you? Somebody that lights fires will be popular up there. And Oz sort of slams the hut window thingy. And he's walking off on his own. He says, bloody Germans. He says, why can't they just leave well alone? So Wayne takes his little love token into the admin hut to see the beautiful Krista. Oh my good Lord, spilled a bit of water. How do I miss a mouth as big as mine? Anyway, and so Wayne says, morning, ladies. And Krista says, hello, Wayne. And Dagmar says, good morning. And he says, I brought you a little something. And he presents Krista with his hand-carved plaque. And she says, oh, Wayne, it's beautiful. You made it yourself. And he says, well, you know, my union card, it says joiner, but I'm a sculptor, really. I mean, it's pretty fucking horrific, to be honest with you. It's not exactly the greatest thing I've ever seen, but, I mean, am I saying I could do better? Probably not. But, I mean, if you were going to try and impress a bird, you definitely wouldn't give her that. Anyway, so she says, oh, look, Dagmar, Wayne has made me a paperweight. And he says, no, it's not a paperweight. It's a plaque in it. You're supposed to put it on the wall above your bed, like. And she goes, oh, of course, it will look very nice there. He says, well, that's all right, innit? I want to fill in one of those forms if you'd give us a hand. And she says, which form? He says, the work permits, whatever you call them. And she goes, you're staying? And he says, yeah, I'm about the only one who is, by the look of it. And then obviously he realizes that he's put his foot in it, because Dagmar turns around. And he says, of course, a couple of the lads haven't made their mind up yet, you know. So Krista gets the forms and he says, you want me to write this for you, yeah? And he says, yes, please, if you would, my love. My German never got past Donner and Blitzen. So she laughs, she grabs a pen and she goes in her full name. And so Wayne puts it on her. And he says, look, you do know why I'm doing this, don't you? And she smiles back at Wayne and she says, I think I can guess. And he's like, that's the green light. There you go. That's the... And he says, right, it's Wayne Winston Norris. So they cut to the scaffold, and it's Neville and Oz and Moxie and Barry. And, you know, Oz is still... You know, Oz is obviously very happy. Right, as we mentioned, do you remember it was a few episodes back where they were talking about what the hut looked like when they were talking about painting the hut, and he went, "What's wrong with this place?" Like, you know, Oz is obviously a man of very, very, you know, little requirements to it, you know, and Oz is very, very happy. You know, he's got a job which makes him a reasonable amount of money. He's with his mates. He's got a bed for the night, and albeit in a hut. And Oz is, you know, quite happy with this current, you know, the state of the status quo, and he's very, you know, Oz is obviously very upset. He obviously doesn't like change. It's been a bit of an autistic attitude towards it. You know what I mean? I say that as someone who has very autistic attitudes, and he says, you know, I still say we're being treated like shit, being treated like shit. He says, I mean, Germany takes us on as cheap labour when their going is good. Then what happens? It cuts up a bit rough for them and wallop. They just want to dump us overboard so they're able to, so their dual figures look all right. I mean, he's putting a very, very, you know, you know, different spin on that. You know what I mean? He's trying to make it seem like he's being badly treated, whereas in fact, you know, he's obviously been treated very well for the last 6 months and been paid a healthy wage. And, Neville, lays it down. He says, we're not being dumped us. We're being invited to stop on as long as we pay their taxes. That's all. If we don't, they will let one of their lads have our jobs. It's quite fair enough. And Oz, back to his, German hating self. Fair. The words German and fair don't go together in my book, pal. And he says, I've heard you going on about English sites back home, man. I was moaning about the way that the Irish are coming over and taking jobs off our lads and not paying tax. It's exactly the same thing here. Only over here, we're the Irish and the Germans are the English. And I says, well, you're right about one thing, Neville. The English have become the Irish of Europe. And Mox says, well, no, he's wrong there, Oz. And he says, well, the Turks are the Irish of Europe. And
the Czechs.
Well, yeah, but again, so Oz now, shows somewhat of a lack of stupidity. Yeah, he actually he's got his knowledge here is quite impressive compared to what I thought it would be. And he says, how can the Turks be the Irish of Europe when Turkey is not in Europe, you duck egg? It's in Asia, man. And he says, and Moxie says, how come they're singing the Eurovision Song Contest? And I says, well, so do Israel, don't they? And they're even further out of Europe than Turkey. And again, so his geography on the Middle East there is, and Asia and the Middle East is quite strong. And Barry says, if you ask me, we're more like the gypsies of Europe, traveling the land in search of employment. Now, this would be something that would get you kicked off Facebook, wouldn't it, George? He says, yes, except that the gyppos don't graft, do they? You were recently banned from Facebook for a disparaging comment with regards to the traveling.
Yeah, I used the P word.
Yes, you did. So, Oz says, except that the gyppos don't graft, do they? And Neville says, you're ridiculous, Oz. He says, I'm ridiculous. Get this. He goes, I'm ridiculous. You're the one stood here with his arms stuck out, hoping the sun will make his tattoo go away. And, he's got him there. And he said, Barry says, it's very interesting, and he says, you could have fooled me. And he says, what is? He says, this, man. He says, dissension in the lower ranks, a sure sign of our missing our tribal leader. I read about it in The Naked Ape. There is a group of chimpanzees, and they suddenly deprived of their elder stage chimp, with the result of that the rest of them took part in several days of fierce squabbling. That's what's happening here. We may not know it, but this is a primitive leadership struggle to see who will succeed Dennis. And he's actually probably right. He's actually quite right there, maybe. I don't know. But it's not Barry's normally full of shite, but he's actually maybe hit the nail on the head there. And I says, Barry, don't take this the wrong way, will you? But why don't you go and boil your head? So, not so long ago, Oz was trying to convince Barry to stay, and they were going to be like the two musketeers of Dusseldorf. And now he's telling him to go and boil his head. And Barry slyly to Moxie goes, I think Oz just made the first bid for the job. So the horn goes. Moxie says, it's 2:00, back on. He said, right, so he says, oh, hey, 2:00, back on your heads, everybody. Now, do you know what that refers to? Do you remember that joke? There was a joke. No. The guy went to, was it like a guy went to, it's like he goes to hell or something like that. And he walks into the, like they said, oh, you got a choice of 3 rooms. And he walks into the first room and they're up to their nipples in shit. And he's like, and they're all, and he's like, oh, he says, I don't fancy that. And then he goes to the next room, they're up to their chins in shit. And he says, oh, I don't fancy that. And then he goes to the next room and the shit just goes up to their knees. And he looks at it and he goes, oh, he says, well, that's obviously, the best option like that. She goes, right, I'll choose this room. So they lock him in the room like that. And then the buzzer goes. And the bloke says, right, everyone back on your heads. George, come on.
Right.
There you go. So that's where Moxie.
Never heard that one.
Back on your heads. That's not the exact joke. I've paraphrased that joke. quite a lot. But yeah, but basically he's saying about, back on your heads. That's like, you've got to back to work, back to your head being covered in shit. Anyway, so Oz is like, there's no hurry. Essentially, basically saying that, it's basically it's one of the last shifts. What they're going to do, sack them, But it's like the camera. So the camera's been. It must be like on a big boom or something. So the camera's been filming them, and then it sort of pans down.
Yeah.
And you see Dennis on his own. So the four lads are up on the thing, being friendly with each other, and the camera pans down, and you just see Dennis all on his own, and very, very, poignant about the the theme of the episode, that Dennis is the loner and nobody can really sort his problems out. So cuts to the hut, and they're sitting around the table, and Oz is like, what a day, I'm shattered, and Bomber says, Wayne signed on then. And Wayne says, yeah, and he says, I've got to put up with you, have I? And Wayne says, oh, cheers, it's his charm that knocks me out, And Oz says, pour us a cup of tea, Nev. So Neville, he just says, he's compliant. He says, oh, aye. And Moxie says, you know what, Nev, he's getting really bossy these days, isn't he? Neville says, aye, I reckon it's Barry's Planet of the Apes theory gone to his head. And then he carries the kettle to the table. They root and starts making chimpanzee impressions. And Oz says, however, man, just pour the tea. And Wayne says, yeah, he says, the advantage of being a chip is you don't have to work in the hot sun all day. And Oz says, I blame Barry for this palaver, he's got us all convinced we're missing Dennis's leadership. And Wayne says, yeah, look, come on. He says, what are we going to do without him? I mean, we've all lent on him enough for 6 months. It's time we gave the poor sod a hand. And Neville says, that's just the trouble, he won't let us. And Oz, again, Detective Oz, he goes, maybe it's his pride. And Moxie just says, maybe he doesn't trust us. So it's one of those situations. Dennis then enters the hut. And obviously, everyone's been talking about him. He walks in and everyone automatically goes silent. So Dennis obviously...
all goes quiet,
yeah. Dennis probably realises that they've all been talking about him. And so he puts his tools in the storage little cage, and he wants to, again, laying down the law. He says, just to avoid any more embarrassing scenes, I shan't be going over the club tonight. I'm going down the town to get legless. So you lot will be safe where you are. And he left the hut. Right. So this is like, there's a little bit of a continuity issue here. So he says he leaves. So basically, he's put his tools away and he's got his towel out. Right. So he's obviously going to go to the bathroom to wash. Right. Then obviously, Oz says, I reckon instead of examining our behaviour, Professor Bloody Barry should have a look at him. I've never seen a man so withdrawn. He's nae thought for his mates. And Neville says, aye, maybe you should pool your knowledge of budgies and Barry's knowledge of chimps. Between you can find a solution. And Oz says, there's no need for that. And he says, isn't there? Seems to me you couldn't care less about Dennis. And he goes, I could. He says, oh, he says, all right, I'll prove it then. And he basically, Oz stands up and leaves the hut as if he's going to follow Dennis, right? And check on him. Now, as we just know, Dennis has just gone to the fucking bog hut, like to have a wash. So it's continuity error there, but we'll not let that spoil it. So, anyway, the return of our favourite character, George.
Magowan.
So, Dennis is sitting at a table in a beer cellar in the town, and a familiar face pipes up, and he says, "Oi, Geordie, alone are you?" And Dennis is like, "Oh," he says, "What are you doing here, Magowan?" And he says, "The same thing you were doing by the looks of it, getting pissed." And Magowan just basically, there's some poor German fella sitting next to Dennis. Magowan's just basically tells him to piss off, like
slings him off.
He says, "Get weg, get weg." I don't know whether that's whatever that is. Anyway, so he fucking picks him up, and he basically slings him away, and he sits down. And Dennis dryly just says, join me, why don't you? And Magowan doesn't really say thanks. He says, so I thought you were out the country avoiding the law. And Magowan says, no, I'm not letting any poxy German court kick me out of town, you know. I thought I'd just lie low for a couple of days, avoid the construction sites, like, you know, I might be a marked man, like. And Dennis says, well, that's a reasonable assumption in the circumstances. So what you doing for Deutschmarks then? He says, you couldn't have got much for our dartboard. Magowan says, oh, for that. I left the darts though, didn't I? And
yeah.
Anyway, so you see Oz obviously then enters the beer cellar looking for Dennis. And like so that I think these beer cellars, isn't it? They just walk around with like the tray full of drink. And if you want one, you just take a drink off the tray and he just marks it on the beer mat, doesn't he? And then, you know, however many chalks on the beer mat, that's what you pay for.
Yeah. I mean, that's a real beer cellar, isn't it?
It is. Well, this, absolutely. So this is a real, famous bar in, I'm glad you pointed that out. So it is, the bar is called the Zum again, I can't pronounce it, Zum, Z-U-M, Urge, U-E-R-I-G-E, the Zumurge. And it is, it's a real beer cellar in Dusseldorf. And so like I say, so Magowan.
It pretty much looks the same, I think. I was looking at some of the recent pictures.
Very, very similar. I saw a picture of it, and it was the tiles on the wall and all that. So what we must do, George, is at some point in the future, maybe you and I could have a little bit of a tour of some of the locations. So, but Magowan, basically the German got a big tray with about 20 beers on, and Magowan just grabs the whole lot. And he says, oh, you stupid Eric, just leave the tray, will you? And he takes the tray off the barman and he says, you know, just put it on the old slate there, will you? And obviously the barman writes it on the beer mat and puts it down. And, clearly Magowan, like he's going to put it on the slate. Clearly Magowan's not going to pay that bill. Like, Magowan's just going to take it and then fuck off and not bother paying for it. Anyway, so Oz enters and he spots Magowan, and he says, bloody hell, Magowan. And then he looks over and Magowan downs his first beer in one. And Dennis, being a bit facetious and a little bit, he's pushing the boundaries a little bit. And he says, good thing drinking with you, Magowan, is you get good service. And he says, so what are you actually doing then? And Magowan says, I'm working as a bouncer, at this gay nightclub. Any of them Ericas get out of order.
Ericas, yeah.
He goes, I have to drag them. He goes, drag them. He says, that's right, drag them down the stairs, kick them into the alley. And Dennis is like, is it voluntary work, like? And Magowan says, 20 quid a night and all I can drink. And he says, it must cost them nearly £100 a night then. And Magowan realizes that Dennis is taking the piss and he says, listen, Geordie, I'm only drinking with you because you're a Brit. Don't take the piss, okay? Otherwise, I'll treat you the same as I do with the customers. And he says, oh, they get customers to them. I'm surprised you haven't frightened them all off. Magowan says, right. He says, as soon as I finish this lot, I'm going to give you a thumping. And Dennis is like, thump, thump, thump away. What do I care, Magowan? And he says, are you tired of life, aren't you? And he says, you could say that. Well, now the German workers that got the knockback from Dagmar see Dennis. And they approach him, and obviously they are not being friendly. And he actually says, du bumpst für die Dagmar nicht. And he says, what is it? Ist es dir recht, wenn wir sie büßen get? Basically, he says, you're the one fucking Dagmar, are you? So is it okay if we go visit her? Which is a pretty, rude thing to say. And Magowan, straight away, Magowan's like, it's like Christmas for Magowan, this. It's like a fight's come to Magowan. And he says, sounds like Eric's asking for trouble if you ask me. And Dennis, says, stay out of this, Magowan, I'll handle this. And he says, nicht Verstein, bonny lad. He says, that means I don't understand. So the German worker gets in Dennis's face and he says, go home with your wife. We will have Dagmar. And Magowan quite rightly says, sounds like he's provoking you. Do you want me to sort it out for you? And Dennis says, you just stay out of this, Magowan. I'll handle this. And Magowan says, you're not hard enough for this. And Dennis says, aren't I? And gives him a punch to the stomach, which isn't, if you were going to, start a fight, Dennis is a fairly small lad and what have you, but I'm sure, being a construction worker, I'm sure he's not that, he's quite strong, but yes, it doesn't not exactly what you would expect to be the fight-winning combination, a little bit of a punch to the stomach. Anyway, Magowan is quite impressed. He says, not bad. And then you hear a German smash the glass and go for Dennis. So obviously Oz sees that Dennis is in danger and Oz shouts, Dennis, Dennis, and he runs over and he jumps on the back of the man that has smashed the glass. And then it all kicks off and it basically turns into a bit of a bar brawl. So the next thing we see is the hospital. And Neville turns up and he finds Dennis is stood outside of Oz's room, and he's got blood and on his face is bruised, and obviously Oz is in a bit of a bad way. And Dennis says it's a bit of a choker, isn't it? And Neville says, is he going to be all right? And Dennis says, they've sedated him. They had to give him a blood transfusion over 2 litres. It's a good job the ambulance got there so quick. And Neville says, what happened? And he says, well, there was a bit of a rumble in this beer cellar. Some German lads, Magowan turned up. Oz got his arm slashed with a beer glass. And Neville says, Magowan, I might have known that man could start a fight in an empty house, and Oz isn't far behind. Dennis admits, got it all wrong, Neville. It was my fault. I started all the trouble. I mean, yes, Dennis did throw the first punch. I wouldn't go as far as to say that he started all the trouble. If I was in a bar pissed up and someone said he was going to try and fuck me bird, he would definitely be going home without a few teeth. You know what I mean? And Neville's incredulous. He's like, did you did? And Dennis says, aye. So, Dennis is admitting to starting the fight, and Neville's quite shocked about it. Anyway, the doctor comes down and Dennis says, this is one of Mr. Osborne's colleagues, Neville Hope. And the doctor, the doctor is obviously not in the mood. Neville's trying to be polite. The doctor says hello, but sort of
very nice as well.
Yeah, she's a very pretty young lady, isn't she? And if you were going to be sick in Germany, that would be the doctor for you. And Neville says, how do you do, doctor?
Yeah.
Says, your friend is a very lucky man. And Neville says, I know, we're grateful for what you have done. Anyway, the doctor, she's not in the mood. She says, don't thank me for doing my job, Mr. Hope. And, she walks into Oz's room and, she says, hello, guten Abend, ist alles gut. Good evening is all good. And the nurse says, all good. And the doctor says, I just wish you men could settle arguments without resorting to violence. And Neville's like, this isn't typical, doctor. She says, I see a lot of people injured in stupid drunken fights about football or women. And Dennis says, is he going to be all right then? She says, yes, he lost a lot of blood, but that's been replaced. I've given him a sedative to help him rest, and fortunately the wound isn't too large. He'll have a scar, of course, but if he wishes, that can be put right. Now, obviously, this is, Neville's perking up here. He's like, what? He says, put right. She says, yes, cosmetic surgery, skin graft, whatever. And then Neville's like, oh, I hope you don't mind me asking, Doctor, while you're here, is there anything you can do about this? And he shows off once again his favourite Neville and Lottie tattoo. Everyone's favourite, including yours, George. And Dennis is like, look, man, Neville, I don't think this is the right time or the place. And Neville says, Oz won't mind. I've got to do something about this. And he shows the doctor his tattoo. And she says, who's Lottie? And Neville says, I don't know, but it's not the wife. And that's the trouble. And the doctor says, so this is an unwanted souvenir of your time in Germany. And Neville says, very much unwanted. I've already lied to the wife once about it. I bandaged it up and told her it was an injury. I can't keep doing that all my life, can I? And obviously, so the doctor, cuts cuts Neville a look, as if to say, you're a bit of a pathetic specimen. So they're all in the bar basically, and they're waiting to find out, news of Oz, and they're all talking. And Bomber says, I'm sure he'll be all right. Wayne's as strong as an ox, isn't he? And Barry says, yeah, I mean, if it was anything really bad, we'd have heard about it already, wouldn't we? Moxie says, I know, but, all the same, it seems just a bit incongruous, like, Oz being in the hospital. So anyway, so Neville enters the bar and Bomber's like, Nev's back. And Wayne says, what's the word then, Nev? And Neville's like, like what, like the way that this, he's very self-absorbed. He says they couldn't do anything. And Wayne says, poor old Oz. And Barry says, I don't believe. He says, no, man, for me tattoo, not for Oz. Oz is fine. Very comfortable out of danger. And they're like, obviously, he's like, leave it out, will you? Nev, you had us all going there for a minute. And Barry says, right, Wayne. And he says, that's right. He says, yeah, right, Wayne. He says, and who wants to hear about your poxy nothing tattoo, Neville? And he says, I'm sorry, I'm just a bit preoccupied. He says, well, what's happened, like? And again, like Neville not picking up on the cue, he says, well, this lady doctor said I should stop being so pathetic and just tell Brenda straight. Said if our relationship was sound, she'd understand. And Wayne's like, they again got the rage. Neville, man, how about if we pulled your arm off, son? Would that solve the problem? How's Oz, for Christ's sake? And I says, well, he seemed a bit, it seemed like he'd followed Den down to Pierre Keller, kind of guarding him like. Anyway, there was a bit of aggro and he got his arm slashed with a glass. And he says to the barman, give us a beer, please. And he says, the funny thing is, Dennis said it was his fault, not Oz's. And then he started the ruck. And Bomber, says, well, Dennis would say that, wouldn't he? And Dennis has actually ended up in the bar. And he says, it's true, Bomber. And the lads turn around and see Dennis in his blood-soaked shirt. So I'm not sure if you noticed, though, that the continuity on the makeup was a little bit out, and that the bruises on his face miraculously disappeared by then. So yeah, that was a very, very good Dennis. Anyway, Dennis says, because of me, Oz was nearly killed, and he's, Dennis is being, owning up. He says, look, I've acted like a right prick, over the last few days, wallowing in my own problems and shutting all you lads out and that. And he says, well, I'll apologise to Oz when he's feeling better, like. He says, but in the meantime, I've got a lot of apologies to make. And he says, you lads will do for a start. He says, I'm sorry. And he's about to leave. And Bomber says, come on, you bad-tempered old bastard, buy us all a drink. And, obviously, all is then forgiven and Dennis gets the drinks in. Barry makes a joke. He says, triple schnapps time, triple schnapps, please, on him. So Dennis goes to, obviously, in the theme of Dennis, making his apologies, he then goes to the admin hut to see Dagmar, and he's like, morning, sorry to hear about Oz. He says, look, can I see you this evening? I think we should have a chat. And she says, yes, I know. And he says, well, this is hardly the time or place. She says, all right, come to the flat at 7. And he says, won't your mother be there? And she says, we can always go out for a drink. And he says, all right, 7 o'clock. And I've got a dash because we're a bit short without Oz. Okay, it's 7 o'clock. And he walks out, and Dagmar's like, Dagmar can see the writing on the wall, I think. And she's very much, upset. And she just see you later. So they're back in the hut, and Neville's once again putting a big plaster on his tattoo. And Wayne's taking
the tattoo.
Yeah. And he says, what's this? And he says, it's plan. He says, what's this then? Plan 349. He says, I thought you were going to level with Brenda. And he says, I am. I just wanted to do it on my own time. I don't want to spoil me homecoming do it. And Barry starts wheeling his motorbike into the hut. And Wayne jokes. He says, anybody expecting a telegram? And Barry says, don't give us a hand, anybody. I'm just bloody ruptured myself, that's all. And Moxie says, what's the score then, Barry? Indoor motocross. And Moxie has a laugh. And he says, Barry says, Old Faithful here has got to get me to Jeddah. And he says, I think I better give her a complete service before I set off. Neville says, you're not riding that all the way to Saudi Arabia. And Barry says, no, I thought I might just ride alongside it, you nerk. Now, have you got any idea of what a motorbike ride from Dusseldorf to Jeddah would look like?
Long.
Very much so. So Dusseldorf to Jeddah would be 5,622 kilometers. So what's that, like 4,000, 4,000 miles, 3,500, 4,000 miles, right?
Yeah.
It will be 58 hours of non-stop driving. So obviously, I think he would have to stop at least once or twice. And so I actually looked at the map.
Yeah.
Do you know, I mean, first of all, you've got to go across Germany. So Dusseldorf is the very, very west of Germany. It's very near Holland. I didn't realize how close to Holland it was. And you see, you'd have to drive across the whole of Germany, which is a pretty big country. Austria, Hungary, Serbia, Bulgaria, Turkey, Syria, Jordan, and then finally into Saudi Arabia. So I mean, there's a couple of countries on that list where you probably wouldn't want to go anywhere. Yeah, I mean, it might have been a bit different back then, but yes. But I mean, I think Syria has always been a bit moody. But yes, so Barry is considering a 4,000 mile bike ride going through some moody countries. So yes, it's I think it was a bit ambitious on Barry's behalf, maybe. And Wayne says, "Yeah, hold on, Barry. This is all a bit previous." Says, "I mean, it's all right for you lot. You can all go your separate ways at the weekend, but this is still my home. I know it's the pits, but I don't want it turned into the pits, if you know what I mean." Yes, we know what you mean, Wayne. He's talking about stuff. And Barry says, "Don't worry, I'll be tidy. I used to be able to build whole Meccano sets on a tea tray, you know, when I was a kid without losing a single piece." So Wayne throws a tray at him and he says, "Yeah," he says, if so much as one nut or bolt strays off this tray, son, it's on your bike." So Dennis goes to the hospital with where he's carrying a bunch of flowers. And you're like, that's a bit strange for a man to take another man a bunch of flowers. Anyway, so he goes in.
Yeah.
And again, you know, I think this is a fantastic piece of acting by Jimmy Neal here. Like, he's again very, very believable. In, you know, sort of, you know, recently traumatized, you know, a little bit tired, a little bit slow, and you know, he's got a fat lip and a black eye, and just, you know, very, very believable acting here from Jimmy Neal. And he says, "Hello, Den, nice to see you, mate." And he says, "How you doing, kid?" He says, "I'm all right, you know." He says, "Just a bit bored with this German hospital radio. Just sounds like the interference, you know, splinking, clunking." And it, you know, Oz is, you know, very much, you know, normally the boisterous guys, you can see he's had the fight taken out of him. And Dennis says, "Look, I brought you a little present." And he says, "What, flowers?" He says, "Look inside."
Flowers.
Look, and there's a can of Beck's. And Oz has obviously been contemplating his, you know, alcohol intake and the ramifications of that alcohol intake. And as someone that stopped drinking it myself many years ago, I've been in that position on several times where I'm thinking, "Oh yeah, man, you know, I've had enough of this." And Oz is, you know, says, "I didn't know."
Actually, I thought a lot about that when I was in hospital.
Yeah.
Because I didn't drink the whole time. Obviously, I was there 6 weeks, you know.
Yeah.
And I drink less now, you know. And I saved a lot of money.
And you use it to buy beautiful coats, George.
Yeah.
So Dennis says, you know, had a bit of a problem getting it in with that lady doctor, you know. I think she's a bit of a downer on the drink, like. And Oz says, "So have I, after what happened last night." Speaking about which, what exactly happened last night? And Dennis says, "How much do you remember?" He says, "Well, let's see. I remember that German with a glass. Bastard. And then I remember the ambulance, and that's about it, really." He says, "The rest is a blur. And I woke up here this morning, I thought I'd painted the hut." And Dennis says, "Aye." He says, "You see, you passed out in the ambulance, loss of blood, you see." He says, "You're lucky, you know, you're a lucky lad, you are, you know." And he says, "Lucky," he says, "if I had 8 score draws, I'd probably lose me bloody coupon." He says, "You know what this is going to mean? Lost me money from work. I'm going to get a whacking great hospital bill when I get out." And Dennis is obviously, you know, he's feeling guilty. He says, "Look, you know, don't worry about that, right?" He says, "I'll take care of all of that. Under the circumstances, it's the least I can do." And Oz says, "Ah, bollocks." He says, "No," he says, "I'm not getting at you, Den. You would have done the same for me, wouldn't you? That's what mates are for, aren't they? Money doesn't come into it." And Den says, "Well, one good thing that did come out of last night," he says, "apart from me getting shaken up, like," and he says, "What's that?" And he says, "Magowan was behind bars." And I was just like, "What?" And he says, he was dismembering those Erics when he's got there.
I bet he was.
They collared him for the whole incident, and they have us down as innocent bystanders. And Oz has quickly changed his mind. He says, well, in that case, shall we have a little celebration? He says, go on, open it. I'm choking for a pint. Yeah. And, that is, it's quite, I've done stuff like that. You know, that sort of 180, you know what I mean? He was, Oz was obviously, in hospital, because of alcohol, fueled violence. He's obviously, very much, if not an alcoholic, a borderline alcoholic.
Yeah.
And, he's, so he's been, he's had a lot of time on his own in a German hospital bed, contemplating the meaning of life and all that. He's realized that maybe his behavior could do with an adjustment. And it's quite a parallel to actually Jimmy Nail in real life. Jimmy Nail was an alcoholic that stopped drinking. And then, 2 minutes later, they blamed it on Magowan. So that guilt and shame that he was feeling has been somewhat relieved.
Yeah.
And he's like, let's fucking have another drink then, And he says, I'm choking for a pint. And Dennis says, good lad, you'll do us. So he looks out the window for the nurse and then he says, not bad for a bloke that's just had a blood transfusion, eh? Well, this lights a fire under Oz, and he can't believe. He says, what are you talking about, blood transfusion? He says, well, I had to give you nearly 4 pints of blood. And Oz screams. He says, are you trying to tell me there's 4 pints of German blood swilling around inside of me? And Dennis is like, well, I'm only surmising that. He says, you know what this means, don't you? I'm half bloody German. No, man. And Oz is absolutely devastated. And Dennis tries to turn it around quick. He says, no, they've probably got a special English tank, man, put aside for emergency. And Oz is having none of it. Says bollocks. And then luckily Nev enters. And he says, all right, Oz, how you feeling, mate? And Oz says, I'm bloody suicidal at the moment, Cho. Cho is a proper Geordie word, that, like, Harry Cho, like, that's a proper Geordie word for your mate and that. And Dennis sees an opportunity and he seizes it. He says, Neville, I thought you were under strict instructions to cover that up. And Neville's like, cover what up? And he says, look, it's no good playing dumb now, man, Neville. He's noticed the plaster. And you see, Oz, according to medical ethics, blood donors are supposed to remain anonymous. But I mean, there's no point now. You might have worn a smaller plaster, Neville. And Oz says, you mean Neville? Give us. And he says, it was Neville. Neville, if you won't tell Oz, well, I'm proud of you, man. Proud of you, Neville. Neville gave you 4 pints of his blood, man. And Oz says, did you, Nev? And Dennis says, didn't you, Nev? And gives him a kick in the ankle. So he realizes, that he's got to, play along. And he says, I did. And he says, well, what a relief then. He says, how can I ever thank you, Nev? And he says, all right, Oz, it was nothing. He says, nothing, not nothing. I always said you were a good lad, Nev. He says, yeah, you know what that means, don't you? Me and you are blood brothers now. And Neville does not look too happy with that. I mean, I can't understand why. It's irrelevant. For me, it would be an irrelevant thing, but Neville's like, I suppose it does, aye. And he says, and Dennis says, well, give your blood brother the English papers, Nev. And he says, thanks, war kid. And Dennis says, I've got to get off. I've got to go and see young Dagmar. And Oz said, you made your decision? And Dennis says, I have, yeah. He says, but I'd rather tell her first if you don't mind. And he says, cool then. And listen, I can make my decision without having to lean on you. So don't think you're beholden to me at all, okay? And Dennis is like, aye, thanks a lot, mate, cheers. And Neville is, for some reason, Neville's not happy with this deceit of the blood transfusion. And he says, I'll see you back at the hut, Dennis. In quite an aggressive manner. And Dennis says, aye, all right. He says, so long, Oz. And he says, Troy, thanks for the flowers. And as he's leaving, Dennis says, if he ever finds out, we're dead. Right? So he obviously explains to people the benefits of their little white lie about the blood transfusion. So anyway, Oz is looking at the paper and he incredulously screams, I don't believe it. And Neville questions him. He says, what? He says, well, first, You know, me and you get and knew this, and he's all panicky and he can't get his words out. He says, it's a sign. He says, well, I've got to go home. He says, you realise that? He says, I've got to go home. And Neville's like, why? He says, look, man. And on the back page of The Sun says, Kevin Keegan signs for Newcastle United. So this was the beginning of some of the glory days for Newcastle United. And I mean, obviously it was I was still very, very young. So I don't really remember, you know, it's not really something that's, you know, I was the, you know, the second, I've got vivid memories of the second Keegan era when he was the manager. But when he was a player, you know, it's obviously, you know, a long, long time ago. But, you know, Kevin Keegan was regarded as basically the, you know, one of the greatest footballers in the world. So he went to Liverpool in 71. He won 3 titles, 2 UEFA Cup, an FA Cup and a European Cup. He went to Hamburg in 77. And in 78 and 79, he won European Footballer of the Year. So he was regarded as the best football player in Europe in the late 70s. And he won the Bundesliga title, and he was they got through the final of the European Cup. And then in 1980, he moved to Southampton. And then in 1982, he moved to Newcastle. So this is what they are talking about. And obviously he helped Newcastle get promoted. And then he retired from playing football in 1984 and then came back as manager 8 years later in 1992. So like 1992, that was like, you know, I was like 16, you know what I mean? And that was, oh God, man, that was a special time, man. I remember it was unbelievable. And so Kevin Keegan is on his way back to Newcastle. So anyway, so Dennis he's gone to see Dagmar, and he's, you know, again, me personally, I think he's making a big mistake, but he's also, you know, he's very much, he mentions it's about his kids. And Dagmar, Dagmar here says one of my favorite lines of the whole show, of everyone, and they're walking down and they're walking along the banks of the River Rhine in Dusseldorf. And she says, it's beautiful, isn't it? And Dennis says, yeah. He says, no doubt about that. He says, mind you, we've got a bridge over the Tyne that's just like that. He says, well, not exactly like that, but it's beautiful in its own sort of way. And she says, you sound as if you're homesick. And then she says, this is, like I say, one of my favorite lines. And she looks at him and she says, well, what's it? Yeah. Is it the Rhine or the Tyne? Which I think is a very, very beautiful way of putting it, and very, very sad but very, very beautiful as well. And Dennis says, well, I tell you, Bonnie lass, he says, over the last few days have been among the worst in my life. And I mean, I know they haven't been a picnic for you either, but he says, well, the way I see things is if I was Dennis the Bold, I'd be starting off a new life in a new country with a lovely lady as a companion. He says, but unfortunately, Dennis the Brave is also a selfish sod, you know, and he gets his mates all carved up when he tries to act big. So he goes back to being Dennis the Realistic, and his role in life is to be there for other people to lean on. And 3 of those people happen to be his wife and his kids. And I mean, I put realism before bravery every time. So obviously, you know, Dagmar is visibly upset, and she says, but would you have stayed if Vera hadn't have come last weekend? And he says, yeah, I probably would, yeah. And it's just so sad. You know, I really think he should have stuck it out with Dagmar. Obviously, that wouldn't have been very, very good for the remaining series. But, and Dagmar says, you know, do you not think that I need to lean on you just as much as she does? And he says, no. She says, well, why not? And he says, well, because it's Vera's got the kids, Dagmar. You don't see. It's the kids. They make all the difference. And because of that, the way I am, I mean, I'll always get pulled into the area of greatest need. And he just says, look, I'm really sorry, Dagmar. I really, really am. So yeah, very, very sad part. And it's, you know, like I say, I certainly feel that he was making a big mistake, but, you know, he's obviously doing the right thing and, you know, going back to being children and what have you. So they cut back to the hut, and Barry's fiddling with his bike, and Neville's there, and he says, oh, look, Barry, how's it going? Is it going to be ready in time? And Barry says, I think so, yeah, just got 1 or 2 minor adjustments, and then I think I better give it a complete change of oil. And Nev makes a joke. He says, well, you're going to the right place for that, oil. And Barry's like, oil? He says, oh, yeah, Saudi Arabia, oil. Yeah. And Neville, and he points out, he says, you're in a happy mood, aren't you? And he says, well, he says, it's the last day, isn't it? Brilliant, man. I've just been over the admin hut and got the passports and the tickets for the Geordie lads. And I've just rang Brenda, and guess what? She's throwing a surprise party for us when I get back. And like Barry's like, valid question. Barry's like, how can it be a surprise party if you know about it already? And Neville says, don't quibble, Barry. And you see him, and he puts the passports in a fucking set of wooden drawers. Not a metal set of drawers that were like, a wooden. I think it's the first time I've seen those wooden drawers. Yeah. I think that was put there on purpose. But and Neville says, don't quibble, Barry. Where's all the other lads? And he says, the club, getting a start on. He says, getting a start in for this afternoon. And he says, what's happening? He says, well, it's a topping out ceremony over in the yard bit. I think he says something like that. He says, topping out ceremony. And he says, but our bit's not finished yet. And hoisted by his own petard, Barry turns around and says, don't quibble. And Nev. So they are basically, they're very, very close to finishing their last day of work. And Moxie's tying a Union Jack around the scaffolding, and they've got a crate of beer there, and they're just waiting for the hooter to go so they can have a party. And Bomber says not long now, and he says this, and Neville says, one of these might be the last. Yeah,
a few crates of beer by the look of it.
Yeah. And Dennis says, you're getting all sentimental. And then Wayne even turns up, and he's got a Union Jack sticking out his pocket, and he says, watch out. Says, you lot are a bit keen, are you? And Moxie says, I keen to get on the bevy. And then Barry turns up as well. And he says, not before 5, though. We don't want to spoil the most exemplary work record by shortchanging the Erics on our last day, do we? Get to it then. And Neville says, what are you doing up here? He says, well, it's different for me. I'm a skilled worker, me. I'm not a labourer like you lot. Taking a piss. And Dennis says, bollocks. And he says, I work on miniature masterpieces of wiring, I do, which cannot be constrained by mere units of time. And Neville said, how is the time, by the way? It must be getting close. And Barry looks at his watch. He says, about 30 seconds. I'll give you a countdown on my superbly accurate digital watch. And he starts counting down 15, 14, 13, and then the hooter goes. So obviously Barry's not too happy with the performance. It goes on. And there's a bit of, they start making a bit of noise. Moxie starts singing Rule Britannia, and they all grab a beer. And anyway, then all of a sudden the crane is bringing a big bucket over, and Neville says, I want to make a toast to Oz. And they all say, to Oz. And they raise a drink, and then from inside the bucket, you can hear a noise, and it is Oz himself. And Dennis says, I don't believe it. And as he comes out, Oz says, mind if I drop in, lads. So, their final drink at the bar. Mm-hmm. And, Oz and Neville are chatting. And he says, and they're talking about Kevin Keegan. He says, can you imagine the difference he's going to make? Kevin Keegan at St. James's Park. And Neville, quite right, he says, first division football for us next season. It actually did take 2 seasons, I think, but he had the right idea. And Oz says, let's have some more neck oil. And again, for his last drink in the bar, calls the barman Adolf. He says, Adolf, 2 more beers. He says, for me and War Kid. And he says, Adolf. And then he says, you don't know about that. Me and him is now blood brothers. And Neville seems to have come round to the idea of being Oz's blood brother now, and doesn't seem too upset. And he even starts saying brother in German. He's like, Bruder. Anyway, so then Wayne and Barry are continuing their conversation about Barry not, being the greatest with the ladies. And he says, I bet you find a nurse out there that'll turn flaccid Frank into stiff Steve. Obviously talking about Barry's penis. And Barry says, you reckon? He says, that's why they call them angels, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Between you and me, Barry, I lost me cherry to a nurse. And Barry says, yeah, was that some depraved, dirty hospital party orgy? He says, no, it was the children's ward at Whitechapel Hospital. I was having me tonsils out at the time. So then they cut across again. So Bomber is trying to persuade Moxie that he could get himself a job in the West Country. And he says, you know, it's all casual. You don't really know what he's talking about. He says, casual labour, no names. And Moxie says, tar for the offer, Bomb. But somehow I don't think it's the most tactful place in the world for an ex-arsonist to work, in a hayfield. So obviously Bomber's been telling Moxie about the farms in the West Country. And Dennis says, you know, Moxie, you could come in handy burning all the stubble. And then Dennis says, look, I've got to go off. I've got to go and see young Dagmar. And again, it's the second time he's called her young Dagmar. So Bomber says...
yeah, see, I noticed that as well, yeah. Only this episode, yeah.
Well, I mean, I don't know how young she's supposed to be compared to Dennis, but yeah, so he's... because, I mean, we worked out, because Neville's supposed to be about 25. He's supposed to be about 35. So maybe Dagmar's maybe sitting in the middle around the 30, something like that. And anyway, Bomber says, you not changed your mind,
maybe it's an in-joke for the crew or something.
Maybe. And he says, no. He says, it just said that we would have a farewell drink, you know, say Auf Wiedersehen, like. And he says, I'll see you a lot. And so he leaves and they're all right. And then as he's leaving, Moxie just smokes. He says, give her one for me, will you? It's a bit much, isn't it, Moxie? Come on. So they're walking, so the lads are walking back to the hut. Obviously, all of them absolutely steamboats. Bomber's got Moxie on his shoulder. Oz is like, you know, and Oz is like, and they're all singing My Way and what have you. And Oz gets all poetic and he says, see all this here, we built this, you know, our skill and labour. No computer will ever be able to take the place of us. Last for 1,000 years, this will. And he produces a beer out of his sling. And he says, I'm telling you, there'll always be a place for skilled labour. So Wayne goes into the hut and he's got a cigarette. And Barry's like, whoa. And Wayne says, what's that funny smell? And Barry's a bit drunk. And he says, that's Vic's Moxie in it. And Wayne says, no, it's not socks. I don't know where he gets that from. And he says, it's stronger than socks. That is stronger. And Wayne says, that's petrol. Your bloody bike's been leaking petrol all over my home, you idiot. He calls him an idiot and then proceeds to drop the end of his cigarette into the petrol and set the whole hut on fire. So he says, there's a bit of a fire. Oh, dear. And then they rush out.
I think Wayne's actually does catch fire, doesn't he, in the show?
Oh,
in rehearsals, I think.
He very
yeah, his trousers get caught alight. Yeah.
I think I've read that somewhere, yeah, as well. And the hut is the actual hut. So, you know, they've obviously with want of
it's the actual hut,
it's the actual hut. So they've obviously built this on the lot in, you know, Elstree Studios, and for want of a stunt hut, they just fucking set the hut on fire. So it's obviously got to be done in one take, hasn't it? So Barry and Wayne run out the hut and they're all, you know, you idiot, and he's like, you know, get back, and Moxie's like Barry shouts, get back, and Moxie goes, to where you once belonged, the Beatles song. And Neville's like, what are you doing standing around here? Don't go in there, the hut's on fire. Anyway, so they're all panicking, and he says, we need to get out of the way, stop prattling around. And Barry's like, me bike, and Wayne's like, sod your bike, what about me bloody home? And Barry's like, how am I going to get to Jeddah? And Wayne's like, I'll kick you there. And then Neville realizes the tickets and the passports are inside. And then Moxie says something funny. He goes, you can all blame me for it. He goes, I'll cop for it anyway. And Bomber realizes, he goes, my gear's in there. And you know, they're all, and Oz makes a joke. He says, hey, Barry, you haven't burnt the toast again. So obviously, and the song that's playing, actually they start playing Ride of the Valkyries, don't they?
Yeah.
So obviously Neville is very worried about his passport because he wants to get home to Brenda. And then Moxie says, you know, it takes me back, lads. It really takes me back. So obviously Moxie's reminiscing to the burning hut. So Dennis is at Dagmar's. They cut to Dagmar, And Dagmar's like, I'm glad we could say goodbye. And he says, well, it's better than jumping off bridges and all that nonsense. And obviously, like trying to be sort of Romeo and Juliet-esque. And he says, you're going to be all right? And she says, I think so. I have to be. I've got over relationships before. Will you write to me? And Dennis says, yes, of course. He says, I'll have a lot of free time on my hands when I'm back on the dole. And she says, I'll send you my new address when I move. And then you can hear in the background, there's a siren. So they're sitting there and you can hear the fire engine driving in the background. And Dennis says, yeah, well, we're getting out of here. And then it cuts and the hut is well and truly ablaze. There's, it's 100%, So Dagmar then says, she says, have you told Vera yet? And Dennis says, no, the arrangement was I'd give her a ring tomorrow morning. So Dagmar looks up, smiles at Dennis, and she suggests, so we could spend one last night together.
One more.
And Dennis is, Dagmar has put it on a plate for them to have a little bit, like a last little fling. But the timing couldn't be worse. And the doorbell rings. So Dennis says, you're not expecting anyone, are you? And she says, no. And she goes to answer the door, and it's Neville. And Neville says, hello, Dagmar. And she says, Neville. And obviously Neville's covered in, suit and what have you. And he says, I'm sorry to disturb you. There's been a bit of an accident.
I couldn't figure out how they know where the house is.
Well, yes. How does Neville know where Dagmar lives? Unless, look, let's just say that, one night they were going out and, Dennis they shared a taxi and Dennis went round there or something like that. But, you are right. There's a bit of a hole in the story there, but we'll not worry about it. So anyway, Neville says, look, I'm sorry to disturb you, but there's been a bit of an accident. And Dennis says, accident? What accident? He says, the hut's burnt down. And Dennis says, who? Straight away. Who's done that, Moxie? He says, no, man. He says, don't tell me. Magowan's broke out the nick. He says, no, it was Barry's bike caught fire. He says, anyway, we've lost everything. Money, passports, ticket, we're closed. And Dennis says, bloody says, well, and Dagmar says, well, Neville, you better come in. You can stay the night. And still, if it was just Neville, they could tuck him away in the spare room and Dagmar and Dennis could probably enjoy their evening. And he says, thanks, Dagmar. There's a couple of the lads. And Barry, Oz, Wayne, and Bomber come in. Hello, Dagmar. Hello, Dagmar. How done? Hello, Dagmar. And Oz, well, this is all right, though, isn't it? And like Dennis is like, it was. Now, another question. Where's Moxie and Bomber? Oh, no, Bomber comes in. Where's Moxie? So Barry, Oz, Wayne, and Bomber enter. And there's no Moxie. So Moxie has disappeared. So Dagmar basically closes the door and, that's her last night with Dennis has been, scuppered. So very, very sad. So that's, that's the end, technically the end of the episode. And then the titles start. But then there's a little bit of an extra scene. So they're on the ferry. Now, the ferry is the Princess Beatrix. I'm pretty sure I've been on that, and I'm sure that my mother will let me know when I speak to her on Saturday whether I'm talking shit or not. But that, like I say,
that's after the Dutch Queen, isn't it?
It is, yes. So that ferry it goes from the Hook of Holland to Harwich. Yeah, that's the Dutch ferry line. And we used to.
Yeah, I've done that run.
Yeah. So we used to, like I say, my family, my granddad was from Holland, so we used to do I've got a lot of family still in Holland where the ferry docks. So we used to do that run a lot when I was a kid. Yeah. And so I'm pretty sure that we've been on that boat. But my mother will confirm that at the weekend, no doubt. And I'll be either number one son for remembering, or I'll be getting another bollocking for getting stuff wrong. But so they're on the back of the boat, and Neville says, I can see England. And Dennis says, aye, that's England, all right, misty grey cliffs. And Oz says, it's bloody depressing looking place when you think about it. He goes, I'm surprised the Vikings never turned back. And Neville's obviously the only one really looking forward. He says, you kind of beat it, but. And I says, can you not? He says, not much in store for us when we get back there, is there, apart from Keegan. No work, no money, no prospects. And Dennis says, I don't know, I met a bloke in a bar before and he reckons they'll be needing bricklayers up our way soon. And he says, oh, hi, where's that? And Dennis just makes a joke. He says, well, it's just a whisper. He says, but I heard that they're going to rebuild Hadrian's Wall. And they all burst out of laughter. And that is the end of the series. So they have gone, like I say, they started by going on the boat, to Germany, to Holland, and then on to Germany, and they finished back on the boat going back to England, and the adventures in between. So one of this was a big kind of risk for the TV company at the time, and it's really paid off. It's been one of the most successful and well-liked TV shows ever produced. And again, if you read, so Jimmy Nail was a nobody, and then after the first episode was broadcast, he's gone down the shop the next day, and he's gone from being nobody to being a superstar, and it was quite a surreal experience for him. And who's going to find that out? But Stuart Burgess, the winner of Jimmy Nail's autobiography. So, obviously the titles were a little bit more involved this time. So Dagmar and Krista got their own title. So there was a picture of them both with there. Herr Grunwald got his own title, and then there was a the barman got his picture up. So there was the doctor, the labourer, and the barman got the picture up, and finally, the final single title that came up was, once again, Magowan. So, they all had their titles come up. So that is the end. And like I say, it's been a fantastic run for season one, series one, that I keep on getting told off for. So if you have any questions, queries, complaints, constructive criticism, and/or /abuse, please remember to email us here at the podcast at Auf Wiedersehen Again @gmail.com. Please do follow us on Instagram at Auf Wiedersehen Again Podcast. Please do follow us on Twitter at Auf Again. Please do like and share the Facebook page Auf Wiedersehen Again Podcast. And please do subscribe to the YouTube channel and click the bell at Auf Wiedersehen Again Podcast. And we are available on all audio platforms, all good podcast platforms, Spotify, iTunes, Anchor, Google Breaker, and many, many more. Our new episodes are released every Friday, and our theme music is composed and performed by Mr. Lee Dosky. So please, please, please do like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And remember, we are sponsored by Top Gun Tattooing, number 12, the Harris Arcade in Reading, topguntattoo.co.uk, audible 189 968 667, and you get a 20% discount off your tattoo by speaking to Zach with the code word Hadaway and Shiteman. And remember, a world exclusive of a free tattoo for every listener. Terms and conditions apply, as long as it is the Neville and Lottie tattoo. And once again, congratulations to Stuart Burgess, the winner of the Jimmy Nail.
Yeah, well done. Yeah.
So, next week, George, Series 2. And Series 2 involves Thornley Manor, Big Baz, Ali Fraser, Kenny Ames, and Marbella. And you and I have spent time in Marbella together. So there will be a few places.
We sure have,
There will be a few places we can reminisce about when it comes down to it. But listen, I can't believe it. 13 weeks we've been doing this, George. This is amazing. And we've got through season 1.
Yeah.
Next week, we are going to be on to series 2, The Return of the Seven, I think is the first episode called. So, next time, we're going to... Oh, in fact, I tell you what, do you know what we didn't say? You know, I fucked up, didn't I? Remember at the beginning, what did we not say? We forgot to go, Guten Tag. So anyway, on this occasion,
Guten Tag,
Guten Tag, but for the very very, very last time leaving Germany. Until next time, Auf Wiedersehen Pet.
Oh, yeah, man. All out of options, nothing to choose. I fizzed out on Netflix, I'm sick of the news. I'd sign up to Sky.